Good morning and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We had an overwhelming response to this event, which really does speak volumes in terms of the growing interest in this rapidly advancing technology and the impact that AI is having more broadly on the leadership development industry. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lee Wallace, and I head up the coaching practice at Peterberry Consulting, where really all our coaching interventions are powered by science, where we use the combination and the powerful combination of both Hogan personality and 360 assessments to leverage the data insights, really to enable us to drive both tailored and impactful coaching outcomes. Joining me today all the way from Tulsa, welcome Ryan. I'm delighted to have Dr. Ryan Sherman presenting for us today. Ryan is the Chief Science Officer at Hogan Assessments, and in his role, he's really responsible for managing the primary functions within Hogan's industry-leading data science department, including talent analytics, product innovation, business intelligence, and Hogan's research archive and infrastructure. He's also an expert in data analytics and using artificial intelligence and machine learning in combination with personality assessment. Ryan has authored over 50 scientific papers, of which several have received significant national and international media exposure. Some of you may know Ryan as the co-host of the very popular Science of Personality podcast, and he regularly writes and speaks about issues and topics, particularly like the one we'll be covering off today. We suspect that with the high numbers of people attending today's webinar, that there's going to be some really powerful, impactful, and a high volume of questions. And we certainly encourage you over the course of the presentation to share those questions in the chat box function. A couple of my esteemed colleagues on the call, both Elliot Sparks, Carolina Fox, and others, will be helping to curate these questions in real time. And we're really going to be drawing on the most frequently asked questions, any very topical themes that are emerging, and we're going to be able to address those to Ryan at the end of his presentation. Certainly, we'll also be sending a follow-up email at the end of today's webinar and provide a summary of some of these overarching themes and responses to some of the more frequently asked questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, buckle up as we embark on a thrilling journey into the world of AI driven leadership development, and we really are witnessing the power of this evolving technology as it reshapes leaders of tomorrow and really redefines what it means to lead in the digital age. So without further delay, I'd love to hand over to you, Ryan. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lee. Thanks to PBC for inviting me. Always good to chat with the PBC folks. And thank you all so much for joining. I know many of you are probably joining from Australia or Asia Pacific, but I did see a few people in the chat joining from North America as well. So welcome to everyone. Hopefully today can be an informative and useful session for you all. As it says here on the title slide, I'm going to be talking about AI and its impact and potential on coaching. There's me. Okay, so this will be the main material that I will cover today. These will be the sort of the main 3 points that we'll cover, and then at the end we will do some summary and Q&A. Happy to answer questions. As Lee said, there will probably be more questions than are possible to answer in one single session, but still, please do put those in the chat because Elliot will compile all of those and make for hopefully a useful Q&A session for all of us. I do want to start by talking a little bit about artificial intelligence. I know many of you probably have already heard about artificial intelligence or already know something about it, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. When I talk about artificial intelligence, I'm using this sort of common definition, which is simulating the human intelligence processes, typically by computers. This includes things like perceiving, synthesizing information, inferring from information, things that we typically think of that only humans can do. Most artificial intelligence machines, again, we're talking about machines here, tend to learn via operant conditioning. So if you're a psychologist, you know what this means, but it basically means we give it lots of data. It looks for patterns, it makes predictions, and then we tell it yes or no if those predictions were any good. It gets feedback about the decisions or the predictions that it makes. So some really common, well-known artificial intelligence tools that people have heard about in recent years. One would be AlphaZero, the chess playing our artificial intelligence engine. Unlike classical chess engines, instead of trying to play by brute force, by simply adding up combinations and saying how many different combinations, what are the possible outcomes, and trying to evaluate which position is the best through basically just sheer computing power, AlphaZero learned to play chess the way humans do. It just learned it was told the rules, and then it just started making moves, and it sometimes it won, and it played against itself, so it would either win or lose in either game. Sometimes it would draw, and over the course of playing itself millions and millions and millions of times, it learned to get better and get better and get better, because it learned which moves were bad, it learned which moves were good, but it learned very much in the way that humans learn things, by operant conditioning. You learn that this is a bad idea or this is a good idea. And before too long, it was the most powerful chess playing computer in the world, smashing all of the classical chess computers with way less computing power. It outperformed all of those computers. So it's a really powerful idea. And when we think about learning, what it doesn't mean to learn something using this method, the advantage obviously AlphaZero has, or the computers have, is that they don't forget their moves. They don't forget the things that they've done in the past. They have this huge memory capacity and can learn from the past and continue to improve. ChatGPT is very similar. A lot of people think about ChatGPT as this sort of human-like artificial intelligence that talks to us and can communicate with us like humans. I don't really think of any artificial intelligence that way. You'll see a little bit of ChatGPT here. I'm sure many of you have already seen it, but before. The way I think about ChatGPT is I think about it a lot like a calculator, but it's a calculator for text, right? So if you can imagine inputting text where you ask it to tell you something, write me the history of Australia in 3 paragraphs, right? And it's going to say, okay, right. Okay, that's the thing I know how to do. I know what right means. A history of Australia. It says, okay, and then 3 paragraphs, right? So it's got some set of rules. So it's like saying 2 + 2 to a calculator, except it's doing that on text. And it says, this is what I think the best answer is. The big difference with artificial intelligence systems versus a calculator is that for a calculator, we know what those rules are, and we define for the calculator to follow a certain set of rules. I'll give you a very simple example. If I want to know the square root of 10,417, I can put that into a calculator. I can do it by hand. It will take me a really long time to do by hand, but there's a set of rules that I can follow to do that calculation. The calculator follows that set of rules and it gets that number. With a system like ChatGPT, there's no set of rules that we have predefined as humans. Instead, we've said, you figure out what the rules are. Make up your own rules. You tell us what you think the answer is. Imagine if we built a calculator like this. I said, give me the square root of that number, and it gives me an answer. And I say, nope, that's wrong. Nope, that's wrong. Nope, that's wrong, until it gives me the right answer. And we do that millions and millions of times. And eventually the calculator learns what the right answer is. But we don't know what rules it's learning, right? That's the key difference with these artificial intelligence systems. We're not giving it the rules. The only rule we're giving it is you make up the own rules and you just keep your own rules in mind. And that's really how ChatGPT works. So a little bit more background on ChatGPT, and that will be the main focus of what I talk about when I talk about artificial intelligence today. There are other large language models out there. They're not as popular, obviously, as ChatGPT. It's one of the most popular websites ever. But there are other large language models out there that can be used, and a lot of what I have to say today really applies to them as well. So this is a little bit of background on it. Many of you have probably seen this. It started in November of 2022. It's built on what are known as the GPT-3 family of language models. There's also GPT-4, and I'll talk a little bit about that later today as well. You've probably seen some of the things it can do. It can have conversations. It can compose music. If you wanted to write you a 1980s rock song like I asked it to do one time, it will do that for you. It can write fairy tales, does student essays. This is a big concern for lots of people in the education industry. In the computing industry, people can use it to find errors in computing. Lots of programmers and developers are already using systems like ChatGPT to help them write better code. It answers test questions, again, much to the concern of the education community. This is already sort of out of date. The original training data was through September of 2021. So you could ask it about facts, things that happened in 2022, and it would have no idea. It would just get that information wrong. But now some of the parts are being integrated with the internet. So essentially you can search particularly since Microsoft has gotten involved with it, to search the internet to actually find more recent answers. So pretty much every day there's new things coming on ChatGPT. So some of this stuff we'll feel like, well, that's a little out of date, but that's because every day there's new things happening with ChatGPT. So for those of you who haven't seen it, this is what it looks like. It's just a black screen. There's other ways you can access it through APIs. This is just me going through an example. I asked it, what is the 5-factor model of personality? This is GPT 3.5 for those of you who are familiar. This is the sort of the free version that was originally available. And it gives me a nice definition of the 5-factor model of personality. This is openness. This is conscientiousness. I forget which order it's going to do it in. Perhaps neuroticism, perhaps agreeableness. Okay, it went for extroversion next. So it will give you all 5 of these things. I think a little bit later on, I ask it, who is Robert Hogan, which is the founder of Hogan Assessments. And it goes through this nice description of who Robert Hogan is. And one of the things that's interesting about it is that it makes mistakes. It's not a fact-finding machine. It doesn't necessarily give you facts. For example, when I ask it, who is Robert Hogan, it tells me that he was a professor at Tulsa University at one time, which is true, but it also tells me he was a professor, and here it is, me typing this in. It will also tell me that he was a professor at the University of Oklahoma, which is not true. It makes logical sense. He's done a lot of work in Oklahoma, lived in Oklahoma for a long time. He was a professor. So if you think of sort of like, oh, do these things, right, that it makes a sense as a thing to say, but it's actually factually incorrect. ChatGPT is probably not the best place to go if you are trying to get factual information. And that's something we'll talk about a little later on today. Okay, I will stop with that example there. There's big shakeups in the test industry. This isn't just in the Hogan assessment kind of industry, but particularly in the certification kind of industry. This was, by the way, GPT 3.5. GPT-4 is way better, has already scored better on all of these things, is outperforming many of these things. And it really causes you to question, what is the purpose of a medical exam, for example, if an AI can pass it? What's the goal of a law exam? If an AI can answer all those questions on a law exam, what do we need the lawyer to answer those questions for if a computer can just do that at their fingertips? But in any case, the point is that it's really causing a lot of concerns in the testing industry. When I think about our industry at Hogan in the personality assessment industry, there's really 4 key areas that AI is impacting us. And when I talk to people about artificial intelligence and Hogan, what I tell people is it actually impacts basically every aspect of our business. Basically every aspect of Hogan's business is impacted by AI. You can use AI to create assessments. You can use it to write items, it's very easy to create a new assessment. Now, I will say that, of course, those assessments need to be checked for validity. You need to run criterion studies on those assessments. You need to look at the psychometric properties of those assessments. Are they too easy? Are the items too difficult? Are you covering the full range of the construct? None of that stuff ChatGPT can give you, but it can give you a really nice, sensible starting set of items for an assessment. It can also take assessments, and I won't be talking about this today, but I've had ChatGPT take the Hogan personality inventory. I can tell you what it wants to score on it. It's a very strange thing to do because, of course, it's not a real person. ChatGPT is just a computer. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't think, I want this or I like that. So you have to write prompts in certain ways. You have to tell it, well, imagine you're trying to get a job, or imagine you're applying for this kind of a job, and it will try to answer questions that it thinks are the right way to answer those. Doesn't do as well as you might think. You might think that this thing can just beat assessments because of this. We've actually found that that's not the case. But again, I won't be going into that in detail today. You can also use it to generate feedback, which is something that I'll talk a little bit about today. But mostly today, I'm going to focus on this bottom, which is using artificial intelligence to practice coaching and to be a coach. So in terms of practicing coaching, that's where we're going to start here. And there's really two parts the way I'm thinking about how artificial intelligence is impacting coaching. One way that you can use AI, and you're going to see here, which I think is pretty cool, is to actually become a better coach, to actually practice coaching clients, perhaps even before you would engage with a client. So I'm going to show you some very simple prompts here. This is just as one very simple one that I've used quite a bit, actually, but there are many other prompts that you can use, but essentially all I'm doing is telling ChatGPT here at the top, this is a set of HPI, HDS, and MVPI scores. I can tell you folks, if you haven't tried this already, ChatGPT knows a whole heck of a lot about Hogan assessments. It knows our scale names. And okay, and let me step back there for a second. When I say knows, I'm going to use the word knows and I'm going to use the word understands. But it's a computer. It doesn't know or understand things the way that we know or understand things. So when I say the word know and understands, I don't mean it in the way that humans know something, right? Again, remember, it's a calculator, right? So you give it this information, it has a database with other information in it. It says, based on this information you gave me, I think the proper response is this, right? It's just trying to give some proper response. So here I'm just giving it the information. I'm giving it Hogan personality information, HDS information, and it has that in its database. It knows what the HPI is, for example. It knows what the HDS is. It knows what the MVPI is. All of that information is stored there. It knows what recognition is. It knows the definition of these terms and can tell you what high and low scores mean on these things, as we're going to see. But one of the cool things that I can ask it to do when I'm trying to practice as a coach is I can actually try to have it simulate being this person. So here you can say, I said, okay, pretend you are this person. I am going to coach you. And it responds, absolutely. I'm ready to be coached. As this individual, I'm highly ambitious, and on and on. It says all the things that it thinks that these scores mean, which just gives you some indication already that it has some idea of what all of these scores actually mean, right? These are percentile scores, by the way. Then you can make all kinds of suggestions to it as a coach. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is what a coach would do in a typical coaching session, but this was actually an example that I was showing somebody some of the capabilities, and I said, I think you should, and they said, consider running. I didn't write this. They said, consider running for president of the United States. So then I typed it in, and I said, how do you feel about that? And ChatGPT pretends to be this individual, and it says, well, as this individual, I could see why you might suggest that. I have high ambition. I have high power. That would be intriguing. I could influence. I could make strategic decisions. That would be really useful. However, I have some concerns to address. I have a low adjustment score, which might mean that I might find the stress of being the president challenging, and I need to develop strategies for dealing with that. I have a low dutiful score, so I need to be careful with that, right? So it goes on about what might be the strengths and weaknesses that they might feel about your suggestion as a coach. We can do other things. We can ask it questions. We can say that a coach might actually ask in a coaching session, tell me a little bit about how you handle stress, right? I noticed that this person had a lower adjustment score and a somewhat elevated excitable score. And says, well, the low adjustment score says that I might struggle with stress management at times. High stress situations could be potentially could disrupt my emotional balance, leading to difficulties in decision-making, and so on, right? So then it suggests here are some ways that I might benefit from developing my stress management strategies, gaining deeper understanding of the specific triggers that increase my stress levels, understanding the importance of seeking support from others and dealing with stress. It mentions high ambition score, right? So it's not just focusing entirely on the adjustment score. It's talking about incorporating other parts of the personality profile into managing stress. And again, if you're working with a client and you're trying to coach them and you ask them these kind of questions, perhaps, again, you're preparing to coach a client. And perhaps in your preparation, this is a question that you might have in mind for the client. You might ask ChatGPT this and see how ChatGPT responds. And it might give you some ideas for follow-up. It might give you some ideas for things to talk about with that client. So I think there's some really potential advantages to sort of practicing this coaching. Here's another example. I've just said, have you considered using an organizer or a planner so that you aren't caught off guard by surprise events? And it says, as an individual with a high prudence score, I'm naturally conscientious and likely to be methodical in my approach to work. I might already even use some organizer or planner. And again, somebody like this might actually have some kind of organizer or planner. Given my high learning approach, I'm open to adopting new strategies and tools, right? So again, another way of thinking about this as a coach, okay, if I see somebody with high prudence and high learning approach, maybe this is something they already do. But if they don't have high prudence, but they do have a high learning approach, maybe this is something I might suggest to them. Hey, I know you're open to new ideas and new strategies. maybe this would be a new idea or a new strategy for you. But the point here in general is that you can make very specific suggestions to the AI that you are coaching, and it will respond to those very specific suggestions in ways that maybe a client would respond and maybe not. But I think it's just a sort of sensible way to sort of practice what you might be engaging with a client in. And then you can try to give it very accurate, what I think would be considered very accurate coaching advice for this particular individual. I said, I think you should keep in mind that your naturally competitive nature can be off-putting to others. While it can help you move up in your career, others might view you as a threat to them. So you will want to be careful how you meet new people. Try to rely on your interpersonal sensitivity to build networks before creating enemies, right? So that might be a regional piece of coaching advice to give this person. And it responds. I think this is insightful advice. It's something I'll take to heart. Given my high ambition score, I can understand how that could be a problem. I appreciate the reminder of using my interpersonal sensitivity. So again, it's really like engaging with another individual. Your suggestion to focus on networking is very valuable. I'll continue to be mindful of how my actions and competitive nature are perceived by others, right? This is the kind of thing, again, as a coach, you can really practice this. And the thing that I'm saying here, folks, is that you might have already understood this, but there's nothing I'm showing you here that's like, oh, Hogan has this tool and nobody else has this tool, right? This tool is already available at everybody's fingertips. All the things that I'm showing you here are GPT-4. To get access to GPT-4, I think it's like $20 a month. That's, I think, 20 USD. And then it costs some fractions of pennies every time you ask it a question. I think this last month, it cost me an extra $14 or something to run through these questions in GPT-4. Now, there are some limits on GPT-4. I think you can ask it 25, or you can basically do 25 kind of questions every 3 hours. So there are some limitations. But with GPT 3.5, if you just signed up, that's freely available. There may be some limitations on that, but I think if you pay the $20 a month, you have unlimited usage of GPT 3.5. So my point is that if you have Hogan assessment scores, you have this tool in front of you, you can actually just do this right now. You don't need anything from Hogan to do this. And I say that and you probably like, what the heck? Who is this crazy Hogan person telling me you don't really need Hogan? Well, you still need Hogan because you need the scores, right? We have the best assessments in the world. We have the best norms ever. We just did a norm update a few weeks ago. And so the best norms ever went from the best norms ever to the best norms ever again. So I mean, there's really still powerful information that you get from Hogan, but with a tool like ChatGPT, you combine those two pieces of information, and you can have something really, really, I think, valuable for you in your coaching practice. And then you can, I said, well, what happens if I give it kind of somewhat inaccurate coaching advice? What would it say, right? So I said, you tend to be more of a rule follower than a leader. And said, well, I can kind of see how you would say this with my prudence score, but I also have a high ambition score. I think it also mentions having a low score on dutiful. And so, but then it says a little bit more about, this doesn't necessarily preclude me from being a leader, and why that they might actually be effective as a leader. So even if you give it sort of advice that might not be that good, it still responds in a way that I think is pretty reasonable. So that's using AI as a tool to practice your coaching, right? I think that's something that's readily available. Everybody can go do that right now. If I was a coach, that's one of the things that I might consider doing right now, is saying, okay, I'm going to practice doing some coaching. Particularly if I was a new coach, I want to start practice doing some coaching around using AI as the participant. Now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about artificial intelligence as the coach. And I suspect many of you on this call, this is probably the most nerve-wracking question or thing that may probably gives you the most pause in thinking about what are the real implications of AI. And notice there in small brackets I have, or the coach's assistant. And I think this is a real key here that I'm not sure how many people are really exploring or even exploiting yet. Is the potential for AI as not just a coach, not really, or not even a coach, but as a coach's assistant. So I'll show you a couple of things that I've done here. Again, I've used this same prompt where this is where I say, write a brief interpretation and career recommendations for some of the following set of scores in the Hogan assessments. And again, folks, I'm not giving, this is all I'm giving ChatGPT. I'm not giving it the definitions of the scales. I'm not telling it what the Hogan personality inventory is. It already knows all of this stuff. So I give it this prompt, and now I'm going to show you how it responds. So this is a summary interpretation. This is just one version. One of the things about ChatGPT that's kind of interesting is that it will give you different responses if you give it the same prompt each time. Some might say that's a positive thing. Some people might say that's a negative thing. It sort of depends. There are actually ways you can adjust that. There's a parameter called temperature. If you set the temperature to 0, it will give you the exact same response every time. And if you set it to 100, it gets really sort of wild in the kinds of things that it will come up with. But in any case, I think the default is 20, so it will mix and match a little bit when you give it the same prompt. But as you can see here, it says this individual has a high score on ambition, prudence, interpersonal sensitivity, learning approaches, and they're driven, conscientious, highly sensitive to others, and eager to learn. Lower score on adjustment means they might struggle with stress. Sociability and inquisitiveness are about average. Okay, everybody see that? So pretty solid interpretation of the HPI. On the HDS, it says highly diligent, indicating strong conscientiousness, attention to detail, but may have a tendency to overwork or become overly critical. Somewhat excitable, somewhat leisurely, may translate into occasional impulsiveness or a tendency to resist others' expectations. They are not overly cautious. All these other ones they're not low, or they're not very high on. And in particular, it calls out dutiful, says they are really low on dutiful, implying that they may resist following rules without questioning them. MVPI, it points out power and science are very high. Some somewhat higher scores on recognition and commerce. And it talks about the implications about what those mean. The hedonism, affiliation, and security values are moderately important, especially they appreciate fun, connection, stability, but they're not their primary drivers. Okay, so pretty dang good interpretation from my point of view. Now, this is GPT-4, this GPT-5 or 3.5, I will say, sometimes can be a little loosey-goosey. Sometimes it really makes mistakes. In fact, I've seen it interpret high cautious scores exactly the opposite that they should. So I would not recommend that you just put your scores into ChatGPT and then take the output and send it off to a client. I would at least at a minimum, if we're pretending if we're using GPT as a coach's assistant, I would be putting the scores in and getting this kind of feedback out and making sure it makes sense, making sure I agree with it, but perhaps using this information as part of your coaching session. If I was a coach right now, I would be setting up for my coaching session, getting all my materials, everything I have on that front prepared. And then I would put some information into GPT and see what it thinks, and then compare notes and say, oh, okay, again, that's what I mean by a coach's assistant, like having a second coach alongside you to make some points that maybe you would have missed, maybe you would have forgotten, maybe you would have skipped over, maybe you would have overemphasized one point and underemphasized another point. And that's one of the cool things that you can use ChatGPT for. The other thing that you can have it do is, as you might remember from my prompt, I also asked it for career advice, and it gives really excellent career recommendations. I've done this with a whole number of people. This isn't just one-off cases. I've done this with many, and these are actual profiles, by the way, where you can ask it to give career recommendations that suggest that this person, again, and it tells you why. ChatGPT really likes to show its work. It says high learning approach, high science. Hey, research and development, that sounds like this kind of person's role. High ambition, high power, leadership, that sounds like this kind of person's role. Commerce and diligent, how about consulting or advisory roles? And it says high science, high learning approach, that also fits well in education. Just for full disclosure here, that profile that I've been using and talking about this entire time so far is actually my profile. So those are the careers that it suggests for me. Research and development, leadership, consulting, and education, all careers that I've had so far. So anyway, seems to do pretty well when it comes to giving career advice. You can also ask it about switching careers. So what kind of advice would you give this person if they wanted a career in marketing? Well, it says, okay, there are some things that would be good for this. And here are the things that would be good for you to switch careers in marketing. Here are some things that would be problematic. Here would be some issues that you might want to address, some challenges that you might face if you wanted to go into a marketing career. So it really can give really helpful career advice on that front as well. And again, if I'm a coach, I've got my own ideas about that career switch, but it might be really helpful to have an artificial intelligence buddy, partner, assistant coach alongside me to help me advise people in these kinds of situations. The other thing that we've seen ChatGPT 2 is, well, let me step back for a second. Many of you are probably familiar with Hogan's reports. We have lots and lots of reports, but essentially what those reports do is they take Hogan scores. If you're familiar with the Hogan system, we have 3 core assessments: the HPI, the HDS, and the MVPI. And with those 3 core assessments, you have a whole set of scores. And when you put those scores in a different context, they have different kind of interpretations and different kind of results. So if I want to know if you're a safe employee, we have a safety report where we take those scores, we put them in a safety context, and we generate a safety report. If I want to know if you're high potential, I take those scores, I put those in a potential context, and I tell you if you're high potential. If I want to know how effective or what kind of a leader you're going to be, I take those scores and I put them in a leadership context, and we have a leadership forecast series of reports. The thing is that ChatGPT, you can provide it any context you want once you have those scores. So I can take that same set of scores and I can say, given the assessment scores, what would you say about this person since to be a safe worker, to follow the rules and procedures, and to mitigate potential safety risk, which is essentially what a safety context is all about. And it says, okay, this is what I can tell you. Because they score high on prudence, they're going to be good at following the rules. However, they score somewhat low on adjustment, so they might struggle under stress. They score low on dutiful, suggesting that they're not going to follow rules and procedures without questioning them. This person scores low on tradition, which indicates that they don't highly value conventional norms or methods, right? So it tells you how this person might fit into in terms of workplace safety. Leadership potential, the same thing. Again, with this prompt, great. And this is one of the funny things that you'll find, that when you're talking with ChatGPT, you start to talk to it like a person. Like you say things like "thank you," which is strange. In any case, what would you say about this person's potential for leadership? And it goes through scale by scale. And in this case, I had it just focusing on the HPI and the HDS. And it tells you, and there's more, by the way, I just cut it off because it gets longer, about why these would be strengths or problems in leadership roles or in terms of leadership potential. The other thing that ChatGPT can do really, really well is look at scale combinations. So a lot of people ask me that. They say, well, and I'm not trying to combat humans with AI here, although I think that's probably an area where a lot of people are interested in and concerned about. But they'll say, well, one of the things that's unique about humans or human expertise, psychologists, is that they can put together scale combinations and understand how these scales interact together. And the thing that I found is that ChatGPT is extremely good at doing these kind of scale combinations. So here I asked it to write me a few sentences describing a person who scores low on security of the MVPI and high on commerce of the MVPI. And it says that this person is primarily driven by financial success and commercial interests. They place less emphasis on stability and safety. They thrive in competitive business environments. They're willing to take calculated risks. They want career growth. They want monetary gains. They're goal-oriented. They're resourceful. They prioritize financial achievements over long-term security. I mean, man, that is a really powerful description, I think, of a scale combination. So, we can use ChatGPT in a whole variety of ways as part of our coaching practice to really get some insight that we might not have otherwise thought about, that we might want to incorporate into our coaching sessions. But again, I also think, much like the chess playing AI that sort of doesn't get trapped into one way of thinking, it sort of sees the entire board all at once. One way to think about these tools is that as humans, we know we fall into our own traps. We fall into our own biases. We have our own ways of thinking. We might focus on one part, one aspect of a flash report or one aspect of a person's personality profile over another, and we might overlook certain things. And one of the beauties of using a tool like this to assist us is that it helps us make sure we're covering all of our bases, making sure we're not overlooking something or overemphasizing a particular part of what an individual is like. The last example I want to show you today is something called a candidate summary. This is something we do at Hogan. And by the way, I have not mentioned the Hogan 360 yet. And so let me mention that first, and then I'll come back here to the candidate summary. I have not done a lot of testing with 360s, including the Hogan 360. I'm starting to do some of that testing now. My team is starting to do some of that testing as well. I have a pretty good feeling that it's going to do quite well with 360 interpretations, much in the same way it does pretty well with Hogan assessment interpretations. I mean, tech manuals, those exist. They're on the web. Anything that's on the web is basically part of ChatGPT's sort of quote unquote knowledge. And so I don't think it will have too much trouble providing helpful interpretations with 360s. And the reason I bring that up here is because now we're talking about integrating multiple pieces of information. So imagine I don't just have a Hogan assessment scores, but I also got Hogan 360 scores, or imagine I have cognitive ability scores. And I'm trying to put all that together to put together a total picture of what this candidate is like, if it's particularly if it's a candidate for a job or if it's a candidate for long-term coaching. This is a real Hogan case. This was really brought to us. This was a gentleman named Mr. Dunlop. He was applying for a plant manager role for a manufacturing company, and he was being strongly considered. And the client asked us to evaluate this candidate. We had the job description for the plant manager, which I've listed in very, very short notes. There's much, much more detail in that job description here. It's a regional plant. They were in charge of strategic planning. They were in charge of operations. They were in charge of compliance. Those were some of the main areas, but there were many, many other things that this person was in charge of. This person would, in this case, they took the Hogan assessments, and you can see a little flash report there of this person's actual scores. They took some cognitive ability tests. This is a score on Ravens, and they also got a score on a Watson Glaser. And ultimately, Hogan was asked to make a recommendation. They were asked to write what we call a candidate summary, which is not necessarily an overall recommendation, although there is one component of that, but it's a what would this person look like in this role? What would be their strengths? What would be their shortcomings? And then ultimately, how overall do you think they would fit in this role? And I'm just going to skip to the end part of that overall recommendation, although the strengths and the sort of shortcomings were very similar. But what I have is an actual recommendation, and this is the recommendation that was made by a Hogan consultant with more than 20 years experience. Now, this process might take a couple of hours to complete. If I get this job description, I review the job description, and if I get their Hogan assessment results, and I get their cognitive ability scores, and if I have a 360, if I get all of that and put all of that together, and I have to write up some overall review of what this candidate is like, that might take me a couple of hours. Maybe if I'm really, really experienced and really, really good at this, maybe only an hour or so. And this is what this consultant said. This candidate is recommended. Mr. Dunlap appears to be a strong problem solver who will be well equipped to handle complexity in the operation. This is almost certainly coming from that Watson Glaser score. They're conscientious, structured in style, and able to take charge, set expectations. Okay, we see high prudence. We see high enough ambition. We see high adjustment there. So they can weather problems and setbacks, maintaining a positive approach. Again, that's that high adjustment. They saw low scores across the HDS, across the board for the most part on the HDS, although I think one score, the dutiful score is around a 57. Coworkers will find them to be systematically disciplined, but also to build interpersonal trust easily with employees. And again, we see a high interpersonal sensitivity score there. Although he should provide consistently structured assignments, metrics, and follow through, there may be times when he would be more effective by being more vocally demanding and assertive, particularly when quick results are needed. And that's that somewhat elevated, sort of average-ish dutiful score that they may want to wait for the supervisors to tell them what to do. So that's what this Hogan consultant said. This is what ChatGPT said. Despite certain areas for growth, Mr. Dunlap's combination of critical thinking abilities, emotional resilience, conscientious, and interpersonal skills makes him a strong candidate for the plant manager position. His capacity for leadership, dedication to structure, and commitment to satisfying superiors align well with the role's demands. It is recommended, however, to assess his confidence in voicing independent opinions during the interview process. Hello? Look familiar to what the consultant said? I think it does. Although Mr. Dunlap's strengths warrant serious consideration for this role, it says altogether, Mr. Dunlap's strengths warrant serious consideration for this role, and his potential to drive operational success at the plant is high. I will say that in the rest of the review, ChatGPT referred to the actual job description and said things like, oh, this person should be good at building the strategic operational plan, or the annual operating plan for the plant, which was one of the requirements of the job description, right? And again, it likes to show its work. It likes to tell you why. I actually asked it specifically not to show its work so that the recommendation would look similar to the because if you don't ask it to show it, if you let it show its work, it will tell you it'll mention all the Hogan scales and tell you why that this person is overall highly recommended versus the one that was done by the Hogan consultant here. Big picture, that takes, if you want to use ChatGPT to do this candidate comparison, that takes about 5 minutes of time compared to an hour or 2 hours of an experienced consultant to do. In my view, it's very difficult to tell the difference between who wrote which one. And so what are the sort of long-term consequences of that? And again, I think you can incorporate a 360 in this very easily. To me, the long-term consequences are, this doesn't mean, oh, we don't need coaches, we can just use AI to do this. In fact, I think what it means is coaches have a very readily available partner to help them in doing their job. I mean, this was a Hogan consultant with 20 plus years of experience, right? So wouldn't you like to have somebody with 20 plus years of experience alongside you to help you make these kind of decisions? I think that's what's really, really nice about this. And of course, there are things that the human is going to point out and spot that ChatGPT might miss, but also vice versa. I think there's advantages to having both. And so to me, I really think about using ChatGPT not as a coach, but as a coach's assistant. Okay, some key points that I want to make here, and then we will have some time for Q&A. First thing is that artificial intelligence, despite perhaps maybe, I don't know if I'm coming across positive or agnostic or negative, but I think probably most people think I seem very pro artificial intelligence. It's not a replacement for sound science. Without science, the ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, they have nothing to say. I mean, there would be no knowledge for it to share with us. Or as Bob Hogan puts it, ChatGPT doesn't do validity. All of the recommendations, all of the suggestions that come from Hogan are based on actual studies with validity. We still have the most validity data of anybody in the world, the most criterion-related validity studies ever conducted on a set of personality assessments. We also have the best norms in the world, as I mentioned earlier. And that's what you really need as a starting place. Without that science, it doesn't really matter. You can use anything. You can ask ChatGPT anything about personality and it can tell you stuff, but it won't be accurate unless there's sound science behind those scores, behind those assessments. Obviously, the artificial intelligence can interpret scores very accurately. This includes both scale combinations and whole profiles, as I hope I demonstrated here. I think it's actually very useful to use AI to practice our coaching, how we can get better at coaching by practicing with an AI and letting the AI sort of role play that person that we might be coaching. Earlier, I gave an example with just assessment scores, but you can imagine given entire backgrounds, you can give it the person's whole career background, where they've come from, where they're trying to go, what are their career goals, and then you can really engage in it with like a true coaching session. That's not what I did, but I think that there's the ability to make that happen. Finally, I think we can use AI as an assistant coach, as someone to help us assist in our coaching. And I think, look, it's pretty obvious that there are both opportunities and threats there. There's opportunities to improve ourselves as a coach, to improve the services that we are delivering. And I do think it's not unrealistic to think about the potential of AI as a threat to some kind of coaching. At the end of the day, I do think that it's really hard to replace the experience at the very, very high end of coaching. I think when we look at top level executives, I think that those folks are always going to want a coach who's been there, a real person who's been in those kind of situations and those circumstances. But I do think there's potential for AI coaching, particularly at levels that traditionally don't have access to coaching. Coaching is typically expensive and time consuming. And I think for good reason. It's really valuable and critical advice that people are getting. And there's limited resources for coaching when we talk about, people who have to have the kind of training and knowledge that you all have. But AI can provide some level of coaching, I think, for people that might not traditionally have access to it. So again, I think there's both opportunities and some potential threats with AI and coaching. And I think, it's incumbent upon us to consider those. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope those of you found this enjoyable. And I see that the chat has 99 plus messages in it. So hopefully it's not all booing and cursing. Elliot, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. The
Thank
chat
you so
certainly
much,
has been active.
Ryan. Thank you so much, Ryan, for that sort of eye-opening presentation. Certainly pointing to the fact that, you know, AI is emerging as a powerful ally, particularly when we're talking about the coaching practice and how coaches can leverage these sort of vast amounts of data to really be able to individualize some of those coaching outcomes, but without sort of taking away the essence of the coaching in terms of, you know, what we can contribute around that human wisdom, the human factor, the empathy, and really striking a balance between how we manage that harmonious balance going forward. So much appreciate your wisdom and would love to hand over to Elle to see what sort of questions we've had.
Thanks, Lee. I'll jump straight in so we can get through as many as we can. The first one is, has Hogan conducted an analysis of ChatGPT score interpretation against Hogan's research interpretations? Obviously, ChatGPT will provide an answer and it will be well written and interesting, but is it valid and relevant?
Yeah. So with GPT 3.5, again, I will say, to answer that question seriously, we have not done a systematic evaluation where we actually like quantified how accurate is it. We didn't like have people rate how accurate is this statement or that statement. Is this written by AI? Is this written by a human? We didn't do that kind of systematic analysis. I can tell you just based on experience, there's really no need to do that analysis. With 3.5, it's pretty good, makes mistakes sometimes. With 4.0, it's amazingly good. You cannot tell the difference between a ChatGPT generated interpretation and a human one with 4.0.
Thank you. And next one around privacy. So what are your thoughts with regarding data privacy, particularly if you're inputting an individual's results into ChatGPT?
Yeah. So that is absolutely one of the biggest issues around all of these AI tools right now is privacy well, so there's a couple: privacy, legal, those kinds of things. I didn't talk about it all today, but I think those are really big issues that are going to continue to come up. I would absolutely not submit an individual's anything that would be personal about that individual, anything that could make that individual identifiable into ChatGPT. I used Mr. Dunlop as a moniker. It's not the person's real name. It is a real set of scores. But again, all of the personal identifying information, all of that was removed. I would not submit anything proprietary either to ChatGPT. So if you have proprietary information, you're thinking, oh boy, if ChatGPT just knew this, there's a couple of ways to access ChatGPT. I showed you the sort of main way that you can access it right now. Anything that you type into that little text box goes down with the way I think about it is like a train station. It's in this main hallway of the train station, and it goes up on the walls. And anybody who walks down that train station can see it, can ask for it, can read it. Anything you put in there is now available. So absolutely do not put any personal private information there. Don't put proprietary information in there. The second way you can access it is through an API. The APIs are more secure. My understanding of them, and you can't quote me on this for sure because I don't, but my understanding is that they are sort of more like private hallways, and that information you pass down them only belongs to you and in your hallway. So you might feel a little safer doing that. I still don't, because I don't want to share any private. Well, first of all, it's illegal in many cases to share any private information there. But even proprietary information, I don't want to share down there because, I mean, that's still somebody else who has it. Yes, I know, I realize it's secure and they're just as liable to get hacked as I am, although probably they're a bigger target than I am. But nonetheless, why have two people have that knowledge if they don't need to have that knowledge? I think the future of these models is going to be built on our own servers. That there will be the ability for people to build such large language models on their own servers where they own, and then you can feel much more comfortable sharing that proprietary information and getting that feedback back.
Perfect. Yeah, I think the next question you've probably covered off, but I'll read through it anyway. Is Hogan already working or planning to work with OpenAI to share your database norms to make it more accurate? And does it have the new 2023 Hogan norms?
Yeah, so no, it doesn't really need the norms per se, although we don't really keep those secret. The norms are, you can actually look up what the raw scores are to the norms. But seems to do is it seems to have an intuitive feel for what's a high and what's a low score. It knows what's high, what's low, what's about average. And that has to come from just reading the internet of Hogan reports and Hogan sample reports and Hogan guides and recommendations around that. So that's where that comes from. As much as I would love to work with OpenAI to develop Hogan specific kind of stuff, I suspect we're not super high on their list of people to partner with. And so I would love to do that, but I doubt, I bet they've got a lot of people who want to work with them on things that have much deeper pockets than we do.
Perfect. And last question, we received similar write-ups as we saw in your presentation with regards to a consultant writing the Hogan reports versus ChatGPT. What, in your experience, obviously it's fairly new, but what are the major differences between those Hogan written reports by psychologists versus the ChatGPT responses?
So the biggest trick is getting the prompt in a way that it will match sort of the style, so to speak. Not exactly the style, like I mentioned earlier, when I had to do this candidate summary, ChatGPT has this real tendency to want to show its work. It wants to say, these are the reasons they have high interpersonal sensitivity. So that's going to be a strength for them because of this and this. Whereas a Hogan consultant tends to try to speak in more business language. They try not to refer to the scales so much. They try to say, okay, this is how this person will be seen in the workplace, and this is why, and these will be the consequences. But you can actually prompt ChatGPT to sound much more like an experienced business consultant, because you can say things like, when you're giving your response, do not refer to any of the scales or their scores. Because again, ChatGPT likes to say they scored high on interpersonal sensitivity, 97, right? It likes to really show its work. But if you tell it basically don't show your work, it will start to sound much more like the consultant. So there aren't a tremendous amount of differences from what I can tell so far. Now, look, this is not a systematic, it's not like I've done hundreds of each and then compared them. I do have a little thing running right now. Don't tell the Hogan consultants, because many of them don't know this, but I have submitted some stuff to them and I told them that it was written by a consultant, but it wasn't. And I want to see if they can tell. And I don't know if they can. So we're going to find out.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. I'll hand back over to Lee.
Thank you once again, Ryan. Super insightful. The message that I'm getting from my end is certainly that as coaches, and if we really embrace this transformative power of AI, we can really become catalysts of some of this innovation and the change that we see in the leaders in the digital age. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that you found this both insightful and thought-provoking, and certainly we'll be following up with the materials as promised. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and thanks for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.